Before we start this video, I want you to imagine something. You're on vacation with your family in a beautiful place where everything should feel peaceful, but suddenly, out of nowhere, police officers surround you, yell at you, point fingers in your face, and treat your family like criminals. Now think about this. How would you react if your own children started crying in fear, watching the very people who are supposed to protect them be the ones causing the harm? And here's the part that makes everything even worse. All of this is happening just because your family is black. But hold on. The most shocking part of this story hasn't even begun, because those officers had no idea that the man they were humiliating was actually an FBI agent. Yes, a trained, respected, life-saving agent being treated like a criminal in front of his children. So let me ask you, what would you do? How would you feel? And why do so many people still pretend this isn't real? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I want to hear your voice, your experiences, your truth. This channel exists to give power to stories that some people try to silence. Smash that like button because this story deserves to be heard. And don't forget to subscribe. Here we talk about the truths most people are afraid to face. Now take a deep breath, because what happens next will leave you speechless.
For years, Marcus's family had dreamed of peaceful vacations, the kind that cleanse the soul after silent battles, invisible to the world's eyes yet leaving deep scars on the body and the heart. Marcus, a black man and a federal agent trained by the FBI, had learned to stay calm amid chaos, high-risk confrontations, clandestine operations, decisions capable of altering the fate of individuals, communities, and sometimes the entire country. He carried with him the iron discipline of his training, the precision of calculated movements, and the strength of someone who had faced more danger than he cared to admit. But none of that prepared him for the kind of battle that kept crossing his path. The kind not fought with weapons or strategy, but with dignity. Even there in his well-earned rest, Marcus would discover that some struggles do not ask permission. That sunny morning, he, Helena, and their 2 children walked toward the resort with light hearts, wishing only to enjoy the simple pleasure of being together. There was laughter in the air, silly poolside plans, the promise of a long lunch and a carefree sunset. Yet the line between tranquility and tension proved to be far too thin. It took only a single sideways glance at the front desk, a subtle hesitation in the service, those pauses that say so much without uttering a word, the kind of gesture Marcus could recognize from a mile away. After all, he had lived through it many times, though he always hoped each time would be the last. The atmosphere shifted like a shadow stretching without warning, and what should have been a light-hearted day began to feel heavy. Helena squeezed his hand. The children, still unaware of what was happening, asked about the pool, and Marcus, with a tightness in his chest, felt he was on the verge of facing yet another battle, only now, not as a federal agent, but as a man, as a father, as someone who refused to accept the world treating his family with anything less than the respect they deserved. The confrontation that followed, whether through words, actions, or weighted silences, not only exposed the open wound of discrimination, but made clear that despite all progress, there is still a long road ahead before justice and equality cease to be ideals and become everyday realities. And Marcus, who had always fought to protect others, realized then that protecting his own dignity and that of his family would be one of the most important and transformative missions of his life, a lesson that would echo not only within him, but in all who witnessed that moment. A painful yet necessary reminder that the world still needs to learn to see every human being with the respect they are owed. The family was walking through the parking lot, distracted by the simple expectations of a day of rest, when 2 local police officers, still pulsing with adrenaline from a recent incident, spotted Marcus and his children. The unwarranted suspicion surfaced in fractions of a second, not because of suspicious behavior, not because of a report, not because of any real indication. It was the kind of automatic, silent, and terribly common distrust, born from a bias so deeply rooted that many don't even recognize it within themselves. All it took was a skewed glance for danger in the officers' minds to take shape. The approach came abruptly. Harsh words, sharp commands, questions thrown like accusations. The tone was inquisitive, cutting, and, above all, unequal. It was the kind of posture that would never be used with a white family on their way to a resort pool. In that moment, Marcus and his loved ones ceased to be a family on vacation and became, in the eyes of the officers, something to be contained. Helena stepped forward, her calm voice attempting to break through the wall rising quickly between them. She explained that they had a reservation, documents, confirmation of check-in, everything in order. But her attempt to bring rationality into the situation was swallowed by the officers' inflated arrogance, which mixed authority with conceit, duty with misplaced power. They should have been de-escalating tensions. It's part of their training. But they did the opposite. They created one, fueled by the mistaken conviction that they were doing the right thing. And then came Marcus's silence. Not a silence of fear, but of calculation, of survival. He knew that terrain all too well, not the parking lot, but the invisible space where lives can change with a single ill-timed response. It was the silence of someone who had faced terrorists, dangerous criminals, missions so covert they could never be spoken of, and who, ironically, found in his day off that none of those threats compared to the slow poison of prejudice disguised as authority. In the cold contact between the officer's gaze and Marcus's self-control, there was a painful truth. It didn't matter what training he had, what position he held, what he had accomplished, or the honor he carried. In that instant, to those men, he was just a black body in a place where they presumed he didn't belong. And in that cruel outline of reality, Marcus realized once again that some battles are not fought with weapons, but with resolve, dignity, and the stubborn hope that the world still can, and must, change. The officers, convinced they were dealing with someone suspicious, completely ignored the family's desperate pleas. Helena's words, filled with panic and reason, seemed to cut through the air without reaching the officers' ears. In a sudden and unnecessary gesture, one of them grabbed Marcus's arm with force, twisting it and shoving him against the parked vehicle. The dull thud echoed through the parking lot, and for an instant everything seemed to stop. Marcus's children, who until then had only known their father as the invincible hero of their bedtime stories, froze. Their wide eyes tried to understand how that strong, protective man, the gentle giant who lifted them onto his shoulders to watch fireworks, was now pinned down, vulnerable, being treated like a criminal. Their small hands trembled, trapped in a new and cruel kind of fear that children should never have to know. Helena, seized by deep despair, screamed for them to stop. Her voice wavered between rage and terror, but each plea seemed to inflame the officers' hostility even more. It was as if, in their minds, every reaction from the family confirmed an imaginary guilt. The abuse of power grew more evident with each passing second, revealing that this was not procedure, it was prejudice, pure and simple, fed by a false sense of unquestionable authority. It was then that Marcus felt a painful truth solidify within him. His impeccable resume, his commendations, the years of service to his country, the risks he had taken in the name of protecting strangers, none of it mattered. To those men, all of it became invisible beside one single fact: the color of his skin. And it was this reality, as old as it was unjust, that imprisoned him more than the hands restraining him. Taking a deep breath, he tapped into the self-control honed by years of training. He would not react instinctively because he knew, with the hard clarity of someone who has lived through life-or-death moments, that any wrong move could turn a humiliation into a tragedy. He needed to wait. He needed to observe. He needed to calculate. Marcus knew that in moments, the truth would have its impact. A silent explosion capable of turning the tables, disarming the officers' arrogance, and exposing the grotesque mistake they were making. But in that exact second, none of that mattered. His only focus was protecting his family, ensuring that none of them left that moment physically or emotionally scarred beyond repair. And as the cold metal of the car pressed against his chest and the growing murmur of curious onlookers filled the air, Marcus held the posture of someone who knows that even in the worst battles, the right strategy can prevent a life from being lost, including his own. As the commotion grew, people around them began to record, driven by a mix of outrage and disbelief. Phones raised captured every second, not only the unjustified violence, but also Marcus's quiet dignity. Even with his arm restrained, his chest pressed against the car, and tension running hot beneath his skin, he held a firm, almost solemn posture. His self-control seemed to defy the brutality inflicted upon him, revealing a strength that didn't need shouting to make itself known. Then a third officer arrived, a seasoned sergeant with a serious expression and eyes sharpened by years of service. Eyes that knew how to distinguish arrogance from authority, impulsiveness from procedure, real suspicion from pure prejudice. The moment he approached, something in the scene unsettled him. His colleague's aggressiveness was far too disproportionate. Marcus's calmness, on the other hand, was far too unusual for someone supposedly guilty. The contradiction was glaring. The sergeant took in every detail, the measured breathing, the strategic silence, the way Marcus didn't react on instinct but by choice. All of it revealed someone trained, not a cornered criminal, but a professional accustomed to keeping a cool head in the midst of chaos. With a firm but non-hostile voice, he asked for identification. Still restrained, Marcus lifted his gaze and, with slow and precise movements, handed over his FBI credentials. A simple object, but one that, in that moment, exploded like an undeniable truth. The effect was immediate. The silence that swept over the parking lot was heavy, almost tangible. It wasn't the silence of mere surprise. It was the dense silence of shame. The sergeant's eyes widened as he felt the weight of the colossal mistake his team had just committed. Those credentials dismantled the entire narrative built by the officer's approach. Marcus was not only not a threat, he had dedicated his life to fighting the real ones. The two officers who had initiated the aggression stepped back abruptly, as if the ground had opened beneath them. Their faces paled, their posture crumbled, and the inflated confidence they carried moments earlier evaporated in the hot air of the parking lot. Now, faced with the truth, all that remained was guilt and discomfort, and the cameras kept recording, capturing every second of this sudden reversal. Because in that moment, it was no longer just a family on vacation witnessing the injustice. It was the world. The revelation hit the officers like an emotional earthquake, shattering in seconds the false sense of certainty that had fueled their actions. The federal agent they had humiliated, shoved, cuffed with arrogance, and treated like a threat, was not a random suspect. He was a man who had dedicated his entire life to protecting his country, facing real dangers, risking what was most precious to him to ensure the safety of civilians, including people like them. The silence that followed was almost deafening. Shame settled over the scene like a heavy fog. The officers, once so full of authority, now seemed smaller than ever, not because of the mistake itself, but because of the way they had refused to see Marcus's humanity from the very beginning. And still, Marcus did not seek revenge. He did not raise his voice. He did not humiliate them in return. He did what few would do. He chose to turn pain into example, humiliation into teaching, anger, legitimate, burning, into awareness. He drew a deep breath, feeling his children's eyes on him, those small witnesses who would forever carry the memory of what they had seen in that parking lot, needed to understand something greater than fear. They needed to learn that true strength is not the kind that shouts, not the kind that intimidates, not the kind that answers violence with violence. It is the kind that remains standing when the world tries to diminish you. Marcus turned to them, still breathing steadily, still holding firm, and calmly said that real strength comes from not letting hatred change who you are. That greatness is not reacting with brutality, but showing dignity when everything around you tries to strip it away. His FBI authority did not make him better or more important than anyone. It simply reminded everyone present that before any rank or title, he was a human being who deserved respect. And in that moment, something shifted in the air. The people recording lowered their phones slightly, not out of disinterest but overwhelmed by the weight of what they were witnessing. The officers stepped back, disarmed not by weapons, but by truth. The sergeant, still stunned, seemed to carry the weight of a mistake he would never forget. Everyone there, every witness, every officer, every person who would later see that video, learned the greatest of all lessons. Never underestimate someone by their appearance. Never judge a face before knowing the story behind it. Injustice may move quickly, but truth always arrives. And when it does, it illuminates even the darkest corners. When the officers finally released Marcus, the air seemed to lose its weight for an instant, only to be filled again by a bitter mixture of tension, regret, and an uncomfortable silence no one knew how to break. It was as if the entire parking lot had been holding its breath. Helena immediately pulled the children into her arms, wrapping them in an instinctive cocoon of protection, trying to soothe away with affection the fear still trembling in their eyes. But the trauma of that scene, their father being treated like a criminal before their eyes, had already etched itself into their memories. Marcus remained standing, steady, though the shock was visible in the details. In the deeper breaths he took to steady himself, in the gaze that flickered between pain and self-control, in the rumpled shirt that had become a physical symbol of humiliation. He knew the system well. He knew he could take the situation to a legal level, demand exemplary punishment, open internal investigations, activate federal channels. He could turn that episode into national headlines, lawsuits, consequences that would ruin careers. But in that moment, something deeper spoke louder within him. Revenge did not build the future. It did not shape character. It did not teach his children about the power of dignity. It did not change anyone's mind. It only fed a cycle he had spent his life, both as an agent and as a man, trying to break. So Marcus rose slowly. He adjusted his shirt with soft, almost solemn movements, as though he were restoring not just the fabric, but his wounded dignity. Then he lifted his head and looked the officers directly in the eye. There was no anger there. What the men saw was something far more devastating. The silent, undeniable strength of someone who carries true integrity. With a voice firm and steady as stone, he said that the incident would be remembered. Not for their mistakes, because mistakes can be corrected, but for his choice to respond with dignity when everything around him invited hatred. He said that a person's greatness is not measured by making others bow, but by showing that no act of discrimination can break someone who knows who they are. The officers lowered their eyes. The sergeant swallowed hard. The people around them, still holding their phones, felt the weight of those words like a truth that echoed far beyond that place. Marcus knew exactly what he was doing. He knew that by acting in that way, he was planting a seed. Small, perhaps, but powerful. A seed that would grow in the officer's conscience, in the memory of the witnesses, in the hearts of his own children. The seed of the idea that justice is born not only from the law, but from the posture of those who refuse to perpetuate violence, even when they are victims of it. And in that moment, he realized that despite everything, he had won. Quietly, and unmistakably, in the way true change is born. The sergeant, his face still weighed down by the impact of the revelation, stepped forward. His gaze, once firm and authoritative, now carried guilt and raw sincerity. He took a deep breath before speaking, as someone who must gather courage to admit the unforgivable, and offered an apology. Not a procedural apology, the kind given out of obligation, but a real one, almost painful, born from the realization that his team had crossed the line of what is acceptable. He acknowledged that the officers had acted without judgment, guided by the wrong impulses and by biases as old as they were invisible. Marcus did not interrupt. He did not confront. He simply listened. Listened with the patience of someone who understands that silence, too, can teach. He knew that racism, especially the unspoken kind, behaves like a persistent shadow. It seeps into automatic gestures, distorted perceptions, decisions made in seconds without reflection. It is a conditioned reflex, learned over a lifetime, and it does not vanish through punishment alone. To break it would require far more: education, emotional courage, and a willingness to face uncomfortable truths. Then the sergeant, in a moment of almost childlike honesty, confessed that he had never imagined someone like Marcus could be a federal agent. The words hung in the air, echoing with force. That simple, devastating sentence exposed the heart of the issue. Someone like Marcus. Someone black. Someone who, in their distorted view, did not fit with authority, training, or prestige. That confession was not just a mistake. It was a stark portrait of the social expectations that shape, limit, and imprison people's perceptions. Marcus closed his eyes for a second, breathing deeply. not out of exhaustion, but to summon the calm needed to turn that moment into something greater. Then he spoke, his voice firm and clear, without raising it. True justice will come the day you look at any black person and see a human being first, not a threat. The sentence fell like a silent lightning bolt. There was no contradicting it, no escaping it. The officers, once so defensive, felt disarmed. The witnesses around them fell into complete silence, captured by the weight of those words. The sergeant, eyes glistening, nodded slowly, as someone who finally understands that change is not admitting weakness, but showing greatness. And there, in that parking lot that had moments before been a stage for violence and injustice, something rare was born. A moment of real learning. A moment in which hard truths, spoken with dignity, broke through even the hardest hearts. The crowd that had witnessed the scene, once silent and shocked, began to draw closer, not to create chaos, but to offer support. The atmosphere shifted from tension to solidarity. Some people applauded Marcus's stance, others expressed outrage at the injustice they had witnessed, and a few, visibly moved, took the moment to share their own experiences with prejudice. They spoke of pain, of humiliations kept secret for years, of wounds time had never healed. And there, in the parking lot of a resort where no one expected to see anything other than smiles and vacation snapshots, something rare and powerful took shape. A circle of collective awareness. Marcus, still adjusting his shirt, realized something extraordinary was happening. The pain of that brutal encounter, which had every chance of leaving his family marked only by trauma, was transforming right before his eyes. What had seemed like weakness was becoming strength. What had been humiliation was becoming a lesson. In that moment, he was no longer just a federal agent wronged by injustice. He was a social mirror, reflecting a reality many prefer to ignore, but which on that day could not be swept under the rug. Speaking calmly about his experience, Marcus made it clear that he did not want pity. He didn't need applause nor recognition for the position he held. What he wanted was change, not an abstract, distant kind of change, but a change that began right there, among the people who had witnessed everything. He wanted the message to be larger than the officer's mistake. He wanted it to reach minds, to break patterns, to open eyes. His goal was simple, yet profound. That his children grow up knowing that the color of their skin should never determine their worth or limit their dreams. And in that moment, the little ones looked at him differently. They no longer saw their father as the victim of a cruel act, but as a giant, someone who managed to turn injustice into learning, pain into strength, fear into wisdom. Someone who showed through his own posture that true greatness is not about winning external battles, but mastering the internal ones. For those children, and for everyone there, Marcus had just redefined what it means to be a hero. With the atmosphere calmer, Marcus asked to speak directly to the officers who had assaulted him. The request, simple and unexpected, made the men exchange tense glances before approaching. They walked slowly, like those who fear their own reflection. And perhaps they truly did. They expected harsh criticism, legal threats, humiliations that would place them in the same vulnerable position in which they had placed Marcus minutes earlier. But what they received was something entirely different. Marcus began speaking with the same measured calm that had guided him throughout the entire situation. He explained, without arrogance, how FBI training works, how one must learn to breathe under pressure, to maintain mental clarity in chaos, to control the instincts that surge in heated moments. He said that decisions made in fractions of a second can save lives, or destroy them, and that, because of this, every action must be guided by a balance between firmness and humanity. He looked the men in the eyes and said plainly, "Today, you failed, not just as police officers, but as people." The sentence did not come loaded with bitterness, but with truth, a truth that sought not to wound, but to awaken. The officers swallowed hard. It was the first time that day they heard something that truly reached them. Marcus continued, "But failures only become permanent when we don't learn from them, when we don't use them as fuel to grow." Those words broke through a layer of defense the officers hadn't even realized they had built. He wasn't there to destroy reputations. He He was there to provoke reflection, to pull them back to the real purpose of the uniform they wore. "You need to reevaluate your reflexes," Marcus said. "Question what makes you suspect someone. Break the automatic cycle that makes you see threat where there is only humanity." None of the officers could respond immediately. They stood before not only the man they had harmed, but someone who, even wounded, chose to teach, chose to uplift rather than diminish, chose to turn an act of discrimination into an opportunity for awareness. The lesson Marcus delivered in that moment did not lie in shouting, nor in authority, nor in the possibility of retaliation. It lay in the courage to educate, the courage to show a better path precisely when the world seemed to push him toward resentment. And it affected them deeply. For the first time, those men no longer saw just a black father in a resort parking lot. They saw a human being of unquestionable greatness, someone who, without raising his voice, had touched the most vulnerable part within them, the ability to recognize and correct their own mistakes. After everything, representatives from the resort approached, visibly embarrassed, to offer formal apologies and some kind of support to the family. It was expected. Procedural gestures, symbolic compensations, attempts to fix what had been broken. But Marcus, once again, showed that his greatness was not measured by rank, accolades, or authority. It revealed itself in his ethics, his worldview, and the strength of his character. He refused special privileges, refused differential treatment, refused any attempt at compensation that did not involve real learning. What he asked for was simple, direct, and powerful: that the resort implement mandatory training on diversity, empathy, and responsible conduct, not only for its own staff, but in partnership with the local police department. Marcus knew that true change does not come from empty speeches or symbolic gestures. It requires practice, commitment, and a willingness to confront ingrained biases. As he spoke, his children watched every gesture, every word, every posture. They quietly absorbed lessons of dignity, courage, and responsibility. It was a learning experience far deeper than any bedtime hero story. It was real life being taught by their own father. In that moment, the children understood something essential. Marcus didn't serve only the FBI. He served humanity. Every choice he made, every act of integrity, every moment of self-control in the face of injustice turned pain into purpose. And there, in front of the resort, the officers and the witnesses, Marcus offered the world a demonstration that would echo far beyond that parking lot. True greatness is not displayed in moments of glory, but revealed in how we respond to injustice. It is not about titles or power. It is about dignity, empathy, and the courage to do what is right even when it is hardest. As the sun began to dip toward the horizon, painting the sky with golden and orange hues that seemed to soothe even the wind, Marcus led his family to a quieter corner of the resort. There, away from the bustle of the parking lot and the cameras, they could breathe, reflect, and simply be together after everything they had endured. His children still carried the weight of fear and confusion in their eyes, and Helena struggled to hold back the emotions threatening to overflow, holding tightly each of their hands. Marcus knelt before them, lowering himself to the height of his children, looking into each of their eyes with the calm of someone who has known suffering and learned to draw strength from it. In a steady, gentle voice, he explained that in life, people often judge without knowing, hurt without thinking, attack without reason, but that these actions could never define who they would become. That injustice and prejudice do exist, sometimes harshly and unexpectedly, but it is the way they respond that shapes character. He continued, choosing his words like foundational stones, that the world still carries shadows, but that each act of courage, each gesture of dignity, and each choice not to give in to anger or hatred lights small flames. Flames that, together, can illuminate entire futures, not only theirs, but the lives of everyone around them. His children listened in absolute silence, absorbing every word as if they were building invisible shields, inner fortresses they would carry forever. Helena, watching the scene, felt a renewed sense of admiration. She realized that, despite the pain of that day, Marcus had managed to transform the experience into something greater, into a lesson, an example, a legacy. And in that golden moment, between the awakening sky and the gentle passing breeze, the whole family understood a profound truth. True strength is not in avoiding suffering, but in transforming each difficult moment into something eternal, something that illuminates the lives of those willing to learn from it. The following day, the resort management invited Marcus to a more in-depth meeting about the incident. There was a mix of embarrassment and determination in the air. They genuinely wanted to understand what could be done to ensure that episodes like this would never happen again. Marcus entered the room with the same calm and steady demeanor he had shown the day before. There was no visible resentment, but there was authority, clarity, and a purpose that filled the space. He explained that structural changes go far beyond formal apologies. Continuous awareness, consistent training, and above all, a genuine willingness to see beyond appearances are necessary. It was not enough to react. The culture of the place needed to be transformed, which required planning and real commitment. In a composed voice, Marcus suggested the creation of an annual inclusion program involving all departments of the resort: security, reception, housekeeping, administration, so that every employee could understand and experience the impact of their actions on the daily lives of guests and colleagues. He proposed lectures with experts, practical workshops, and periodic internal evaluations to measure progress and identify areas for improvement. Every detail of his proposal reflected experience, empathy, and strategic vision. As he spoke, the managers took frantic notes, impressed not only by the practical intelligence of his ideas, but also by the way Marcus was able to turn a painful personal experience into an opportunity for institutional learning and growth. They began to realize that he was not just a victim of a mistake. He was a natural leader, someone capable of inspiring change, shaping behavior, and transforming entire environments simply through his presence and vision. By the end of the meeting, there was more than just written plans. There was a feeling of renewal and commitment. Marcus had managed, without raising his voice, without complaining or punishing, to leave a mark that extended far beyond that resort. He was planting seeds of awareness, understanding, and justice, and everyone there knew those seeds would bloom. The news of the incident spread rapidly across social media, fueled by videos recorded by witnesses who, unknowingly, had captured more than a misguided approach. They had recorded dignity in its purest form. But unlike most viral situations marked by outrage, accusations, and verbal aggression, something surprising happened. Thousands of people began commenting on Marcus's admirable composure. It wasn't just that he was an FBI agent. What fascinated people was his ability to remain composed amid chaos, to turn hostility into an opportunity for teaching, and to become a symbol of resilience without raising his voice, without succumbing to hatred, and without seeking revenge. Influencers, journalists, teachers, and even activists shared clips of the video, highlighting his extraordinary calm, his clarity of thought, and the quiet strength of his presence. The internet began treating the story as a rare example. Violence does not need to be met with violence. It can, and should, be confronted with intelligence, strategy, and humanity. Every gesture, every measured word from Marcus was interpreted as a lesson in character, a silent manual on dignity and moral leadership. Marcus was not seeking fame. He did not want applause or public recognition, but seeing the growing response, he realized that his actions had reached far beyond that parking lot. They had touched hearts, sparked reflection, and planted invisible seeds of change in society. The story was not just about him or his family. It was about everyone who, when faced with injustice, can still choose greatness, and in doing so, inspire the world to do the same. With the growing repercussions of the incident, the local police department reached out to Marcus, requesting a personal meeting. This was not a procedural gesture nor a formal apology. It was, in fact, a genuine request for guidance. They wanted to learn from him, understand how they could improve their officers' approaches, and above all, break the cycle of prejudice that often arises unintentionally but causes deep and, in some cases, irreparable harm. Marcus accepted the invitation, not out of ego or desire for recognition, but with purpose. He knew that this opportunity could spark real change, extending far beyond his own experience. During the meeting, he spoke calmly and clearly, addressing essential topics: empathy, discernment, and the importance of never judging anyone based solely on appearance. He explained that a person's skin color should never be a criterion for determining their actions or intentions. With the authority earned from years of training and service in the FBI, he shared fundamental principles that guide his work: how to maintain emotional balance, how to make rational decisions under pressure, and most importantly, the sacred rule that has always guided his actions: presume humanity, not danger. Every word was measured and purposeful, and the entire room listened as students to a master. When he finished, Marcus made it clear he was not seeking apologies or personal recognition. What he wanted was genuine commitment, that each officer present would reflect on their own actions, internalize the importance of empathy, and use that learning to act more consciously, humanely, and justly. For the first time, the officers present felt that they were not facing someone merely pointing out errors. They were facing a guide capable of showing a more conscious path. A path where strength and authority coexist with dignity and respect, and where true policing means protecting without prejudice, serving without judgment, and always acting with humanity. After a few days, Marcus and his family were finally able to enjoy their vacation as they had planned. The aftermath of the incident still cast subtle shadows, but paradoxically, that experience had brought them together in a deep and quiet way. There was now a shared understanding of strength, resilience, and love that showed itself in the small gestures of everyday life. The children began to see their father in a different light, not just as the FBI agent who faced extreme situations, but as a real hero, someone whose courage manifested not through weapons or confrontations with criminals, but through the ability to face injustice with integrity, calm, and dignity. Every gesture Marcus made during that episode became, for them, a living lesson in character and bravery. Helena, in turn, watched everything with quiet, profound pride. She knew that family life would not always be easy. Her children would still have to contend with sideways glances, silent judgments, and barriers imposed by a world still struggling to see without prejudice. But seeing Marcus play with the kids in the pool, laughing genuinely for the first time since the incident, she realized something more powerful than any protocol or training. Even when the world tries to erase them, they have enough light to shine back. Those laughs, the clumsy dives, and the little races along the poolside were more than simple fun. They were symbols of resilience, signs that the family could transform pain into joy, fear into learning, and humiliation into strength. And together, they understood that they could illuminate any path, even the darkest, simply by maintaining their humanity, their unity, and their capacity to shine, no matter what the world tried to impose. A few weeks after the incident, Marcus received an unexpected invitation. A major university, impressed by the impact of his story, wanted him to give a lecture on emotional courage, leadership in crisis situations, and confronting prejudice. Initially, he hesitated. He did not seek the spotlight, did not want to turn his pain into a spectacle, nor expose himself more than necessary. But upon reflection, he realized that this was a rare opportunity to amplify the positive impact of his experience, to transform a painful episode into a lesson for a broader audience. Helena encouraged him. She said that his voice could open doors for families who face similar situations every day, but rarely have the chance to be heard. That he could teach not only with words but by example, showing how dignity, calm, and courage can inspire real change. On the day of the lecture, Marcus stepped onto the stage before hundreds of students, professors, and professionals from various fields. He told the story honestly, without exaggeration or dramatization, presenting only the raw truth and the wisdom gained through the process. He spoke about how every decision we make in moments of crisis carries weight and responsibility, and about how our reactions to injustice reveal the deepest character of a person. He explained that a man's true strength is not in intimidating, dominating, or punishing, but in inspiring. Not in reacting impulsively, but in choosing a response capable of transforming realities. Every word was measured, filled with purpose and lived experience, and each sentence seemed to quietly penetrate the hearts of the audience. The silence was absolute. There were no whispers, no distractions. Everyone present understood that they were witnessing a lesson that transcended any classroom, a lesson about humanity, integrity, and courage in a world that still needs to learn to see beyond appearances. At the end, the applause came not merely as recognition, but as gratitude for someone who had shown by example that facing injustice with dignity can indeed transform lives. At the end of the lecture, a young black student approached Marcus, tears in her eyes and her voice trembling with restrained emotion. Between sobs, she shared that, upon seeing the way he had handled injustice, she had understood something profound. She didn't need to shrink in the face of the challenges she faced every day, whether at work, at university, or even within her own community. For the first time, she said, she could envision a future in which she could occupy important spaces without fear of being diminished because of the color of her skin. Marcus listened intently, each word quietly piercing his heart. He felt a mixture of emotion and gratitude. In that moment, he realized that this conversation symbolized the true purpose of his entire journey. It was not about an isolated incident, nor about a police misunderstanding that could be resolved with formal apologies. It was something greater, about how a single act of courage, a stance of dignity and integrity, can ignite the flame of hope in others, showing them paths they had not yet dared to imagine. As he left the university, Marcus walked with a sense unlike any he had experienced during his FBI career. There were no covert missions, complex strategies, or high-risk operations. His greatest, and perhaps most transformative mission was to show the world that dignity is a more powerful weapon than any tactical protocol. That true courage is not measured by external victories, but by the impact we have on the lives of those who watch us and are inspired to move forward. And on that day, Marcus knew that his actions would not be confined to a parking lot or an isolated incident. They would spread, silently and powerfully, through every person willing to learn from his example, reminding everyone that true strength lies in remaining human in the face of injustice. Meanwhile, the police department that had confronted Marcus began a deep and lasting transformation. The two officers directly involved were sent to intensive training on diversity, empathy, and responsible engagement. For the first time, they were forced to confront their own shortcomings, reflecting on how automatic judgments and internal biases can cause real and irreversible harm. The sergeant, profoundly affected by the experience, led significant changes in patrol guidelines, implementing procedures that prioritized careful assessment, clear communication, and the presumption of humanity. Approaches became grounded in principles of discernment, empathy, and respect, inspired by the model Marcus had demonstrated. The case also sparked community initiatives. A program to foster closer relationships between residents and authorities was created, using real stories, like Marcus's, as educational and training material. The goal was to show that every person, regardless of appearance or position, deserves to be seen first as human, before any label or suspicion. The impact was so significant that other districts began to observe the example and implement similar measures. A quiet movement of institutional and emotional change began to take shape, breaking down old rigid structures and opening space for a new perspective on safety, respect, and humanity. Marcus did not seek recognition or praise, yet, without realizing it, he had initiated something far greater than any protocol could measure, a wave of transformation touching hearts, minds, and institutional practices. He had shown that true leadership is not limited to ranks or titles, but manifests when courage, dignity, and integrity become seeds of change for everyone around. Over time, Marcus and his family's story gained prominence in newspapers, documentaries, and national debates about systemic racism and police violence. Unlike narratives often driven by pain and resentment, this one was celebrated as a symbol of resilience, awareness, and leadership. It became a living example of how dignity and purpose can transform painful experiences into collective learning. Marcus, Helena, and their children became a reference for families facing similar injustices, offering hope and inspiration to those seeking the strength to move forward. Many asked how he managed to remain calm during that critical moment. Marcus always answered with the same clarity. Calmness did not come from the absence of fear, but from the presence of purpose. He knew that responding with aggression would not only harm his family, but also feed stereotypes and reinforce cycles of prejudice. By choosing greatness, he broke that chain. His stance demonstrated that the fight against prejudice is not waged only in the streets, in courts, or through institutional programs. It often happens in the way we choose to respond to the most difficult moments, in how we treat others, and in the courage to teach even when we are hurt. Marcus's story thus became more than an account of injustice. It became a powerful reminder that true strength manifests in integrity, empathy, and the ability to transform pain into light, inspiring all those who cross our path. Years later, with his children grown, Marcus revisited that day, not with pain or bitterness, but with profound gratitude. Gratitude for having been able to transform a traumatic moment into a bridge for real change. Gratitude for having shown his children that the color of their skin is a source of pride, not fear. Gratitude for having inspired people he would never have met, if not for that episode. And above all, gratitude for having discovered that his true mission in the world was not limited to protecting lives as an FBI agent, but extended to enlightening consciences as a human being. In his final reflection during an interview, he said something that resonated in thousands of hearts. They may try to bring us down because of our appearance, but they will never erase who we truly are. The strength we carry is not in what the world sees. It is in what we choose to do when the world tries to diminish us. Those words spread like a silent flame, reminding everyone that even in the face of injustice, it is possible to act with dignity and courage. And so, Marcus's story became an enduring reminder that justice can fail, people can err, but the greatness of a resilient spirit will always find a way to transform pain into light, inspiring generations to face the world with integrity, hope, and humanity.